Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Navigating the Work Compass. I'm Kate Luzio, founder and CEO of Luminary, and my esteemed co-host Susan Chapman-Hughes is running late, so you will see her come back into the conversation shortly. But over the last couple of weeks, and certainly actually over the last several months, we've been talking a lot about leadership, what it means to be a leader, what it means to be a good manager, how leaders must be connective, but more importantly, how leaders must be empathetic. And as we are hitting Women's History Month, and yesterday we celebrated International Women's Day, we couldn't have thought of two better guests to bring on to Navigating the Work Compass than Lorraine Harriton, who is the president and CEO of Catalyst, and Whitley Edwards, Associate Creative Director at Burns Group. And they, over the last couple of years, and Luminary has been a proud partner of their Bias Correct campaign since 2019, have done phenomenal campaigns, yes, throughout Women's History Month and much longer than that, but really to bring conversations around topics that need to be discussed in the workplace. And so they launched last week, and yesterday was a big reveal around their CEO campaign, Chief Empathy Officer. So Whitley and Lorraine, and hello, Susan.
Hello, and welcome to our guest. It's really great to see you all today.
Very excited. So Lorraine, we've had the pleasure of working with Catalyst over the last couple of years, as I mentioned, with Bias Correct. But can you give a little bit of background on Catalyst, what, all of the things that you're doing, and then we'll have Whitley talk a little bit about Burns Group.
Sure, and thank you for having me, Kate. It's a pleasure to be doing this with you all. So Catalyst is a global nonprofit that's focused on advancing women in the workplace. We are celebrating our 60th anniversary this year, and our theme is Great Reimagining, Equity for Women, Equity for All. And we service corporations. We have over 500 supporters, multinational companies, and we do research and thought leadership around what it takes to advance women in the workplace. We have a whole suite of learning and knowledge products to help corporations enable workplaces that work for women. And then we do a lot of convenings. In fact, on March 17th, we're having a hybrid event at the New York Hilton, the first time in 2 years. So we really are about creating real equity in the workplace for women.
Amazing. And Whitley, welcome. I get to know Whitley as well because we work with the Burns Group as one of our own corporate members.
Yeah, so the Burns Group is a small independent creative agency that has been around for a little bit over 17 years now. I've been there for 4 years. So I came in and got to work on Catalyst immediately, the first year Catalyst worked with them. So they're one of our favorite clients because they have all of this research and history that we can pull from to kind of create campaigns that really add important conversations out into the ethos, which is really important to us as an agency as well.
We love working with you. We've done some really great things together.
And Whitley, if you'll recall, cast your mind a year ago when we were launching Women's History Month, International Women's Day, the Bias Correct campaign last year. Susan, my esteemed co-host, was part of that conversation as well.
Yes, and it was a great conversation. And this is so timely in terms of talking about empathy because we see so many leaders out here who lack it, who don't understand why it's so important. And so I love this conversation about a chief empathy officer. How did that even come up?
Yeah, so I think again, one of my favorite things about Catalyst is they have all the data. So if you like research at all, they are the place to go to really just get your head wrapped around what's going on. Because I think so much of the problem with the biases that women face in the workplace is that they are invisible. So you can feel like something's happening to you. You can feel like maybe you're being overlooked because of X, Y, and Z. But unless you have the data to point to, it's hard to make that argument, not make you sound overly emotional. So in the first year, obviously, really looking at the different ways in which we label men and women. And one of my favorite reports that they have is really about the double bind dilemma that women face in the workplace as they try and climb the ranks. So basically, if you're a woman who shows up and wants to be a leader and you act with traits that are more feminine, like caring or empathetic, people do not see you as a competent leader because in our minds, leader equals masculine and really assertive and dominant. So when women portray those features, they're also not seen as likable, which also causes issues on their trajectory. So you're basically damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, if you're a woman. Yeah. And so I think what was interesting about this year is Catalyst is celebrating 6 years, which is amazing. And it really, it's interesting that it overlapped in this time of reflection, because I think as corporate world, everyone is reflecting on what worked, what didn't, how we're evolving, what the future looks like. We've never had the opportunity to reflect before. So we really started by looking back at Catalyst and what they've done in 60 years. And what was really fascinating to us is it's easy to forget that 60 years ago, you could run an ad that said men wanted for CEO positions and openly discriminate against women for roles. So those people, the idea that that happened just 60 years ago makes it so much more easier to wrap your head around the fact that these biases have still been in the workplace. Just because legally you can't say it anymore, it doesn't mean that our ideas of leaders aren't still ingrained from 6 years ago, which is crazy when you think about it. And so, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Whitley.
Oh no, yeah. So I think what that really stood out to us and the ways that it impacts. But the other thing that really stood out to us is all Catalyst's research they have now that they've done over the past 2 years around the power of empathy, and how even if you look at it on a global level, all of the countries that really seem to navigate COVID better were led by women with an empathetic style. And it was directly correlated back to empathy, because it is more of a coming together and trying to work with the individuals that it allows people to innovate, I think, and really bring their unique selves to the table. Whereas a masculine way, which would be more taking charge and not asking for help or trying to fight through this on their own. So I think that was really interesting overlap between the corporate world and just the world in general. And I think what's a little bit interesting to me too is this idea that Catalyst has had this research forever that proved that women basically get promoted based on merit, whereas men get promoted based on potential. So it's the first time we're actively, openly seeing empathy is actually a driving force in innovation for companies right now, in keeping employees happy and reducing burnout among women of color in particularly. And it makes sense when you think about it. Right now people are really evaluating their lives a little bit more and what's important to them. So of course, knowing that your company sees you as an individual versus sees you as just a worker is really important in keeping people happy. So it's just an exciting time, I think, for Catalyst, because their data is really coming to life in ways and allowing us to have these conversations about really looking at that ultimate level in leadership, the CEO position, and how we can rethink how we think about our leaders and what they need.
So Lorraine, you mentioned in the beginning, and Catalyst is such an incredible organization and such a driving force around advancing women. You have this incredible opportunity to work with so many leaders across the hundreds of that Catalyst works with. As these last 2 years have sort of transpired, how did this idea of empathy, and this was going to be the campaign for this year, kind of come up from your standpoint?
Well, Catalyst, when I came on board in Catalyst, we decided to focus on the future of work because there's so much change going on. So even in 2019, we identified that there would be rapid technological change, more crises, changes in people's attitudes toward work-life effectiveness, upskilling and reskilling. But what happened during the pandemic is all of these trends turbocharged. And because of that, we have a whole change in what the workplace is looking at and what is the leadership style you need to be effective in that environment. So our focus on empathy actually was something we identified in 2019, which is really interesting. And then what happened is through the pandemic, it became more and more clear that people are looking for a more humane workplace. So because this big experiment of so many of us working from home, like we're having this Zoom call right now, this would not have happened in 2019. We would have had an event over in your beautiful facilities there. We wouldn't have done this. I know we talked about it, but now we're doing this. But we see what the story is. We have our children going by. We're trying to balance things. And, what people are saying now is 75% of them want more flexibility. The reason we have this great resignation is partly because people are really looking at what's important to them. What do they want? It's important to them to think about a purposeful existence, more flexibility in their lives. These are the things people want. And we have this big talent shortage going on. So we have a reimagining of the workplace that we are all part of right now and figuring that out. And then we have to have a reimagining of leadership to be relevant and effective in the 21st century post-pandemic. And as you can see from the political crisis, the humanitarian crisis we have right now, this is a continuation. One of the things we identified in 2019 is disruption from climate change, disruption from pandemics. We never thought it was going to happen, 2 months after, but it did. And now we have disruption from political unrest. So we need a new leadership style to address that. So empathy is a key critical skill to enabling that. Empathy can be taught. It's a business skill. It's also a life skill. I'm on a learning journey like we all are to be more empathetic. And my 92-year-old mother tells me that every day. She reminds me that I need to understand what it's like to be 92 years old and not having difficulty getting up from her bed, and my 3-year-old grandchildren remind me of it every day when I'm with them, and I understand where they're coming from and why they're crying and having tantrums. So but in business, it is absolutely critical for leaders to do that. And we need to disrupt the bias, as we were just talking about, that this is a skill that's a feminine skill, that it is not a skill for leaders. It is an absolutely critical leadership skill. And many of the leaders today who are progressive, who are part of Catalyst, understand that. And they are looking to lead with empathy. They are to lead inclusively. And they know they are going to have to do that if they want to attract, retain, make productive, reduce burnout. All our research is showing that empathetic managers and leaders have higher intent to stay, more productivity, more innovation, and especially when we talk about women and women of color.
Yeah.
Susan, how much do we talk about this on so many episodes, right?
We absolutely do. It's so interesting because there's two things that have happened in the last week that have really brought this home. I was with dear friend Carla Harris, who's a friend of ours, and she was talking about the 4 generations that are in the workplace right now, and that you have boomers and Gen Xers, and then you have millennials and Gen Zers. And she talked about, when you say jump to boomers and to Gen Xers, they say how high, right? And that's how the workplace has been operated, how people have engaged. But then when you ask millennials and you ask Gen Zers jump, they say why. And, it just totally it just came home to me. I was like, wow, that is exactly what we're seeing in terms of why empathy is so important. Because when they say why, they really want you to understand, hey, look, this doesn't exactly work for me. Give me a sense of what that is. The other data point that came home to me was all of these CEOs and now government officials who are let's just get back to work. And people are literally rolling their eyes and rebelling and saying, you know what? I don't want to just get back to work. I'm not interested in coming back to the office. And I think particularly in old school industries like financial services and others, where there now are lots of alternatives to go to. You can go to a fintech where they'll give you 100% flexibility. You can go and make just as much money, if not more. But also we're finding that money is not really the driver for a lot of people in the choices that they're making. Would love to hear your perspectives about what you're seeing are the kind of je ne sais quoi factors that people are really looking for as they start to navigate back to the office or back to their new opportunity.
Well, Susan, everything you said is just right on the money as reflected in our research. 75% of people want flexibility as their number one choice. That's higher than compensation. So the people who are saying, let's just get back to the office are likely to be surprised when people just say, well, I'm not going back and I'm going to go someplace else.
Right.
So, the leaders need to adjust their style. I mean, to hear where people are coming from and give them the opportunities, and if they want to retain their employees and make them productive. So, lifestyle, having passion for what you do, passion and purpose is really critical. Work-life effectiveness, flexibility is a key part of work-life effectiveness. Now, we Catalyst have been promoting flexibility for a very, very long time, because we know that just practically and pragmatically, women do, and unfortunately they still do, and during the pandemic is even worse, the lion's share of the unpaid labor at home. So, if you got to go in for the parent-teacher conference, or, it's nice if you can work from home and then go over and do that. Companies are understanding that, and technology is enabling that. If this had happened 20 years ago, we would not have been able to respond in this way, but we are very lucky that it happened at this time. And technology has always been a driver of change. I personally believe that, we are at a moment in time. It's famously said that sometimes nothing happens in decades, and sometimes decades happen in weeks. Yeah. We are at a time where change is happening in weeks and months, and we're feeling it every day. And it is really on us to really, another famous saying is, if you want to predict the future, you got to make it. And we have the opportunity to make it. And I feel so privileged to be working with, over 500 plus leaders of industry who impact millions and millions of people and communities around the world. And they are committed to doing this. When I poll the leaders, there is a gap between people saying 75% they want flexibility and what some of the leaders are saying. Yeah. I'll tell you, more and more leaders are saying we're leaning into flexibility. And if you go on the Catalyst website, we have a lot of practices. We have the Catalyst Awards. Every one of them are leaning into this flexibility because let's get back to the empathy. You can't just lean into flexibility. You have to into the revising your management style. I mean, when these people say they have to come back to work because I meet them at the water cooler and that's who I want to promote. Right. That's, I have to say, that was a great environment. You were managing lots of teams, and some of the people had to go home immediately, and they weren't hanging around till 12 o'clock at night so that they could go have drinks with you. So we have a more inclusive workplace when we're all on these Zoom calls. Now we got to figure out how to translate that into a flexible environment and change our leadership, and empathy is critical to it.
So I mean, again, we talk about this, Susan and I, every episode. This campaign is so different than some of the other bias correct campaigns, because you're physically having people put themselves on the cover of CEO magazine, now renamed Chief Empathy Officer. Why this campaign? What is it about that, that image that you're hoping people either kind of reframe? Because Lorraine, to your point, and Whitley, to your earlier point, this is not something that you can't be taught, right? Just because you're not empathetic today or to a situation, and your example of your mother and your grandchildren, I have very similar with my millennial and Gen Z employees, all the way to my mother and my father. It can be taught, and it is a lifelong journey. But why this particular campaign with the cover of the magazine? What messages are you hoping to send there?
Well,
I think sorry, go ahead, Lorraine.
Whitney, I think you should address that. Yes.
I was just going to say, I think we are a visual society. And the thing is, there is that saying too, and research supports it, you can't be it if you don't see it. For so long throughout the history of corporate America, when we see CEOs, they're white men. And so this also allows us to penetrate that visual effect of what does a CEO look like? And it could be anyone of any race, of any gender, from any background. And that was something that really excited us about their willingness to partner with us and really try and rebrand and make your brain challenge the idea of what a leader looks like when you just are visually picturing one. So that was really important to us. I also would say, too, to double back to what Lorraine was saying earlier, the other thing that their research has shown that I thought was really important to note is there's this misconception that when people are at home, they're not working. But what companies have actually seen, some of their highest productivities in the past 2 years at home, because when you take away the commute, when you take away the water cooler talk, people can sit down and get it done quickly. They're more efficient. No one wants to be on a Zoom all day chit-chatting, so let people get to the point. So I think it's important that leaders also challenge their idea of what productivity looks like, because the data shows that people are being productive at home. And the more that you trust your employees, the more likely they are to give back to the company itself and, be really committed and dedicated. So I think that's also just an important thing for leaders out there to be thinking of as they're restructured.
One of the things that was great about the campaign is that anyone can promote themselves to a chief empathy officer. So you can use the photo uploader, put your picture in there, and then promote it on social. Anyone can do it. And so not everyone in the magazine, we have Karen Carter, who's the chief human resources officer at Dow Chemical, as one of our CEOs. So, and this gets back to the fact that empathy is a leadership trait. Everyone can benefit from being empathetic. Talked about it, how it works at home. We've talked about it in this crisis that's happening in Ukraine. We talked about empathy is a key trait for understanding what is happening with those people and dealing with their employees and dealing with understanding where everyone's coming from. So there's a message right on our website pointing to our resources around empathy as something that's critical for dealing with people in crisis.
Yeah.
There's a question that really came in, if I can ask it, Susan, in the chat. The chat. Lorraine, as Catalyst is such a big organization working with so many different kinds of companies. The question was, my boss isn't empathetic. How do I help him become a more empathetic leader? He's not empathetic to my situation. Right. Which I think we talk a lot about the leader side on the show. We also talk about how employees or who's on the other side are feeling. So when you don't have that empathetic leader, it's really hard.
Well, I think it's important to try to do your best to have those difficult conversations, to give some feedback. I've been a boss at many levels, and I think most bosses appreciate honest feedback, even though it's hard for us to give it. And then, you can point them to the Catalyst website. We have a whole bunch of stuff. We have an empathy quiz. We have a bunch of learnings. We have a lot of resources around this. So you can back it up with the authority of the research that we've done to explain this. And you can say that, everyone's on an empathy journey. It's a lifelong thing that you learn. As I said, my mother's telling me this all the time, so I think that that you can depersonalize it in fact, you can you say that this is a trait that is becoming more important because leadership is changing in these changing times, and encourage them to become part of Catalyst, use our resources, and because it's something that this change in leadership and moving to a more inclusive leadership environment is something that all companies are on a journey for.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about the quiz.
You are not empathetic. It says that I would appreciate if you could be more empathetic to my situation and hear what I'd like you to hear.
I love the tools, right? I love the fact that you have the quiz that people can take. Yeah. But I wonder if you could just be very tactical and say, like, look, after you take the quiz and you recognize that you're not really empathetic, what do you do? What are some actual actions that people can take to learn how to become more empathetic? Because I think there are a lot of people who say they're empathetic, but in actuality, they're really sympathetic. They're not really empathetic. They're not putting it in action. They're not getting to know people who are different than them. They're not putting themselves in other people's shoes. They're not learning about other cultures. So what are some of the things that you think people, leaders can do to become more empathetic?
Well, certainly we have a lot written on this, and it's very actionable in fact, even for the campaign, we have these empathy cards that tell you, things you're talking about, that you need to be listened and understand. You need to then feel their pain, as was famously said. And then you need to show with action that you really do care. But you can go through training on this. You can read about it. You can do workshops in it. Then you can also, practice it on a daily basis to be aware of it. But there's definitely, I mean, just within Catalyst, and we're not the only organization, there's a lot right out there to do if you have intentionality around wanting to focus on this.
Yeah. And what do you think because there feels like there's like this like separation, right? There feels like there are a lot of companies who totally get it today, and a lot of them who are like, I don't really get it. What do you think the implications are for businesses that don't really push and make empathy much more of a priority?
Well, I think companies who do not lean into the new normal, which is, more flexibility, a more humane society, different leadership traits, they're going to have a difficulty attracting and retaining and motivating their people to be at their best. And that's going to result in not having as good competitiveness, not having as good business results in the long term. That is why there are so many organizations really focused on this, because they understand that this is good business. This is not a nice to have. This is a critical business requirement.
I also think the exciting thing is there is a talent shortage. So, you can go back to that boss and you can tell them that you're feeling like they're not being empathetic. And if they do not hear you and improve, you have options. You can leave because you're valuable and there's someone out there that will act in an empathetic way. I think what we've heard over and over again, or at least as a woman going in a male dominated industry, what I heard over and over again is change takes time. But I think if the pandemic taught us anything, it doesn't have to. The corporate world shifted to a digital landscape in 2 days because they had to. So when you're forced to have to act, you figure it out. And that's really like where the pressure of people speaking up and telling their bosses and their managers how they feel and how they could be better served, I think is really important right now. Because what's cool about this opportunity is we've all been going up against this glass ceiling, but now that we're all remote, mostly, there is no ceiling. It's a new ceiling. There's a lot of different ceilings. So we have the chance right now to really hone this moment and transform what corporate world looks like we've never had before. And I think Catalyst has so many great tools for people. Like, I cannot recommend going there more and diving in deep, because there are a lot of guides in how to have those tough conversations and a lot of stats to back it up so that you can't be told that you're being emotional about something because you have data.
Right. I mean, we are at a real crossroads because of the number of women who have dropped out of the workforce, of the changing dynamics. We have many conversations, lots of data for people of color, and particularly Black people, who've said, what, I don't want to be back in the office because it allows me not to deal with microaggressions. I don't have to deal with some of the drama. Just really quickly, I have to share this story. I had a meeting yesterday, and I got to the meeting early. And I was waiting in the hallway for the guy to come and connect with me, because he was our meeting was happening 20 minutes later. And so I sent an email and I said, hey, look, I'm outside. So if you want to just come grab me when you're ready, that'd be awesome. So not less than 2 seconds later, he comes off the elevator and I said, oh, hi, are you so-and-so? He said, oh, yeah. Are you here to let me in the door? And I said, no, I'm not. And he goes, well, what do you do for us? I was like, nothing. I'm actually here to meet with you. And his whole face turned upside down. And look, to his credit, he apologized. He actually sent me 2 emails apologizing and acknowledging that it was problematic and troubling. But it couldn't escape my brain that here we are in a situation where they don't expect for me to be the person who's in charge showing up. And I think that, being empathetic is really going to force people to change their mindsets around what a CEO or what a senior leader actually looks like. And I think that's so imperative, but that's not going to happen unless we get more people back into the workforce who've dropped out. Yeah. So would just love, as we're kind of closing in on time, any final comments that you all want to make about, your chief empathy officer, a charge to people, whatever it is, because it's been a great conversation.
But before we go, I just want to make one, Whitley, I loved how you said, for organizations say, well, it takes time. And the analogy of in less than 2 days, 99% of companies put their workforce online. right? So, and we're talking big companies, the banks of the world, technology, like literally going online when they had never been in remote before ever in the history of their company. So I love that analogy. Listen, it takes time, but it can happen pretty quickly if you put your mind to it. Whitley, any last comments on the campaign? I know we've put up in the chat for those of you that are watching, but also those of you that are listening to the podcast later, go to catalyst.org and you can find out all of the information. You can change your profile pic. You can be on the cover of the magazine. But Willie, over to you, and then Lorraine.
Yeah, so the website for creating your cover for taking the empathy test is actually catalyst.org/bias correct, or there's also a dummy website, ceotoday.org, because we have ads out in the wild trying to pull people in. I think the biggest takeaway, I would encourage all of you guys, one, to go and do the empathy test, because it is a skill, it's a muscle. We can all work on it. We can always be constantly improving it, to Lorraine's point. I also think, just remember right now, we as employees hold the power of making the workplace what we want it to be. So bringing these resources and having these tough conversations, or taking your talent elsewhere, because you really are empowered right now to reshape the world like we never have been before. So use your voice and use your LinkedIn profiles to share out your new CEO cover.
Well, I just like to second what Whitney said and say that, now is the moment. I think there isn't anyone on this call who couldn't use these resources to impact their environment or for self-development. So I encourage you all to take advantage of it.
Great. Catalyst.org or catalyst.org/bias correct. Both will lead you to great information and be able to become a Chief Empathy Officer. Susan, I'll hand it back to you to end.
Yeah, so thank you so much to our guests, Whitley and Lorraine. You have been fabulous. We love all the wonderful information. We appreciate you taking the time. And so to our audience, we just encourage you to dial in on Apple Podcast or on Google Podcasts and listen to Navigating the Work Compass, where we talk about current issues of the day and all about how we think about how workers work today. So stay tuned, and we'll look forward to seeing you in our next episode.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week. Happy International Women's Day, a day late.